How deep should a back squat be? In this tutorial, you will learn how deep should a back squat be, how deep should you squat, and important consideration when determining how deep you should squat or you want to squat. How deep should a squat be? Well, the first question is we need to determine different squatting depths and then also associate the terminology to it. So let's get started. We have a full squat, which is normally determined by a knee angle of 60 degrees. Keep in mind 180 degrees is fully extended, so 60 degrees knee angle, around 60 degrees knee angle is a full squat. A half squat is around 90 to 100 degrees knee angle. A quarter squat is 110 to 120 degrees knee angle. And some people also have the terminology of a deep squat, which is less than 60 degrees of knee angle. So you have the full squats at 60 degrees knee angle. The deep squat is deeper, lower than that. How deep should a back squat be? Well, the first thing is it depends on your ability to squat and your ability to squat deep. Not everyone can squat to full depth. Well, I'm the first one who says everyone should try to get to full depth, and most of the people can get to full depth with the right amount of training and effort. But there are exceptions to the rule that people cannot get to full squats. The second consideration is it depends on what your goal is. Yeah, so I've discussed that in previous videos. Start with the end in mind. What is your goal? And then you need to look what's the best way to achieve that goal. The same is true for the back squats and how deep you should back squat. So look at your goal and then you should find the answer to how deep you should squat. So if we think about the goal, often we think about specificity of a sport, and then we look at which squatting variation is most specific. And then most of the time specificity is what looks like the sport, which is not entirely true. I've done a previous video about sport-specific training and how you can determine what is sport-specific and what is not sport-specific. I've outlined the concept of dynamic correspondence. Again, it's a concept, it's not a commandment, but this concept gives you a good idea of what are all the variables to look at when determining what is sport-specific or not sport-specific. So back to the question, how deep should a back squat be in order to be specific for your sport? Most of the time, specificity is related to angles, so we're looking at the knee angle, and this is where the problem starts. If we look at the squat, we can basically look at a minimum of 2 angles, if not 3 angles. So the first angle is the most obvious, it's the knee angle, but we also have to look at the hip angle, and we can look at the angle of the ankle. Well, that is less important, but definitely the hip angle is important, and that's what's not very often looked at. So if you're in a sport where you want to specifically look at the angles and believe the angles have a transfer to the sport's performance, look at the knee angle and the hip angle. Very often we see that in sports you probably don't have a very deep knee angle, but you have a deep hip angle. So therefore, you could also make an argument that a full squat is specific to your sport, not because of the knee angle, but because of the hip angle. So let's get away from this angle discussion. Anyway, how do you determine which is the most specific variation, squat variation for your sport? Again, I need to refer to the previous video about sport specificity and dynamic correspondence and how that also unfolds in a season. So if you're in a sport, you need to look at the whole season. So if you want to have a specific squat variation in the special preparation or specific preparation or competitive period, there needs to be a build-up from the general preparation to the specific preparation. So the principle of dynamic correspondence says you want to use exercises with a high dynamic correspondence closer to the season, to the competitive season, and exercises with a low dynamic correspondence a little bit further away from the season. So if you are, as an example, if you're in a sport where jumping is required, A quarter squat can be very specific to your sport and to the jumping performance. So a quarter squat has high dynamic correspondence. However, to build up to that quarter squat, you should also look at exercises with a lower dynamic correspondence earlier in the preparation, and that could be the full squat. So when determining how deep you should squat for your sports performance, make sure you look at the entire picture of where you are and where you want to develop into, and what's the best way to achieve that. As an example that I've just outlined with the jumping, very simple example, if the most sport specific is a quarter squat and probably a ballistic quarter squat, so where you're jumping up with the weight, you need to look how that can unfold, and then you probably start with full squats, move on to quarter squats heavy loaded, into ballistic quarter squats, and then into some plyometric jumping activities that are close to your sport. Okay, that was the topic of specificity for a sport. So what is a good back squat depth for the everyday training people? There are a lot of discussions whether full squats are beneficial or not. Let me just quickly outline a few benefits of the full squats in a random order. One of the benefits is that a full squat will take you through a full range of motion. So if you're interested in developing strength and muscular size, going through a full range of motion will be more beneficial than a partial range of motion. If we look at the physical formula of work equals force times distance. So the more distance you travel, descending and ascending, the more work you perform in your squat. So that's another argument why a full squat can be beneficial. Another argument is that a full squat is a very natural movement. If we look at kids, again, they are able to sit down into a full squat position, maintain in that sitting down position and play in that full squat position. It's a very natural thing. However, we humans, especially here in the Western world, we kind of lose that skill of sitting down in that full squat position and doing any activities, just for the simple fact that it doesn't occur in our normal day-to-day life. Why do I say Western world? We see in the Eastern world, Asia, we see a lot of people sitting down in full squat position and doing activities in that position. The full squat is also better or beneficial for a well-rounded development. What does that mean? The full squat activates more and a variety of muscle groups. So it activates the anterior chain, the posterior chain, also the glutes to a certain extent, and the lower back. Whilst with the quarter squat, you probably have more activation in the anterior side and not so much in the posterior side. There have also been studies out there that show that full squats have a greater effect on sports performance, such as sprinting and jumping, than quarter squats. Well, that's a bold statement. Let me give you the specifics. These studies from Schmidt-Bleicher, for example, fellow German, looked at quarter squats and found that if you want to achieve improvements in performance, you need to squat 3 times or more of your body weight in a quarter squat, whilst in a back squat, full back squat and a full front squat, the ratio is somewhere between 1.2 to 1.4 times your body weight. So it's much easier to get to a level of 1.2 times body weight in a front squat or 1.4 times body weight in a back squat than 3 times body weight in a quarter squat. Well, it's fair to point out that these studies have been done on, let's say, untrained to little trained individuals. A recent study that has looked at trained individuals actually found more improvements in performance in the quarter squat as opposed to a full squat. However, keeping this in mind, there's a strong argument to what I've outlined before, to the dynamic correspondence and how you build it up. So if this quarter squat is very specific and reaps the highest benefits for sprinting and jumping, you need to find a way how you build up towards these quarter squats. Yeah? So you might do full squats in the beginning, and then throughout the preparation, you build up to quarter squats. So quickly wrap up. So what are the benefits of a full squat? Better muscular development because of full range of motion, more work being done, work equals force times distance. It's a very natural movement to sit down. We learn that from early ages. but somehow we forget how to do it. A more well-rounded development, anterior side, posterior side, glutes, lower back, and so on. And higher performance improvements in untrained to medium-trained individuals. What are the benefits of a quarter squat? There are also benefits of a quarter squat, as I've outlined. It seems that quarter squats can improve performance more in trained individuals when the performance is jumping or sprinting. Quarter squats are much easier to learn. Why is that? Well, everyone who tried to teach a full squat or who has ever done a full squat realizes that it's fairly simple to get into a position to 90 degrees or parallel, but even more difficult to get past that position into a full squat. It's just difficult for most people who've never performed it. Therefore, a quarter squat is much easier to learn. And it takes a lot of effort to teach someone to get into the full squat position in the first place and then load that up. But once that is done, teaching the person to get into the full squat and being comfortable in the full squat position, then also progressions in weight and load, weight/load, will be easier. And it's much easier to overload the quarter squat. So to wrap it up, how deep should a back squat be? Number one. Most important, it depends on your ability to squat. Are you able to squat all the way or not? If you're not able to squat all the way, first and foremost, make an effort to learn to squat all the way down. If it's still not possible, well, a full squat is not for you. A full squat is defined by 60 degrees knee angle. A half squat is defined by 90 to 100 degree knee angle. A quarter squat is defined by 110 to 120 degree knee angle. And a deep squat is below a full squat, less than 60 degree knee angle. How deep should you squat? Again, it depends on your goal. Are you an athlete? What's most specific for your sport? Look at dynamic correspondence. And then also look at how you build up from low dynamic correspondence to high dynamic correspondence. If you're an everyday training people, again, it depends on your goal, but the full back squat has benefits on muscular development, more work being done, more athletic development, or more well-rounded development. And the quarter squat has the benefits of easier to learn, easier to overload, and to a certain degree maybe more specific for your sports performance if we talk about running and jumping and you are an advanced athlete.